Good morning and welcome. My name is Abel Guillen. I'd like to welcome you to the first ever webinar conducted by CDE for wildfire preparedness. My name is Abel Guillen. I'm a deputy superintendent here at CDE. This webinar is for school districts, county offices of ed, private schools, charter schools, school organizations from all over California are in attendance, and so we welcome you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We know this is a busy time of the year as many of you are starting school, opening up schools, and it's a busy time of the year. So really appreciate your time. We think we've got some great speakers lined up for you today. We hope that this webinar will be informative and you'll gain some practical information that you can use for your districts. This webinar will be recorded and posted to CD's website in the near future. And so we know that schools are really the heart of our communities, and wildfires are impacting them more than ever before. So when schools are closed due to smoke, ash, evacuations, power outages, and fires themselves, our communities really feel that. With some of the worst wildfires in California history occurring in recent years, schools need to be more prepared to handle these massive and frequent fires. That's the reason why we're meeting today. And we are here to let you know that you're not alone when disaster strikes. And we have local, state, and federal partners here to assist you when those emergencies happen in California. So we'd like to acknowledge our partners that are here with us today. The Governor's Office, Cal OES, CalFire, the National Weather Service, the California Natural Resources Agency, the Butte County Office of Education, and you all, our education community partners that are here today to make this event possible. So we want to thank you all for being here today. We think we've got a great program. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. Superintendent Thurman, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Guillen, and thank you all who joined the webinar. And as you can see on the screen, we have a graphic up about many of the things that we want to do to help transform education in California, to make sure that every student has access to a meal, that we have preschool for every young child in our state, community schools, mental health, so many great resources that California is able to offer. But we also know that California has persistently been impacted by natural disaster and by wildfire. We've had so many conversations about that over the course of the last 4 years. Matter of fact, the very first day, even before I was sworn into this office, about 4 years ago, I spent my first day in Butte County as we dealt with the aftermath of one of the most dangerous wildfire, and we know that this has become part of California's experience. And so we're hopeful that this webinar creates a way for us to work together on how we can prepare and how we can plan and how we can respond. We can't control or prevent many of the disasters that we experience, but we can certainly control how we prepare, how we respond, how we support each other. We recognize that when these wildfires occur, there are many disruptions. The worst is the loss of a loved one, loss of homes, loss of school. And our heart goes out to those who've lost loved ones, and certainly to those who are trying to open a new school year under these difficult conditions. And so we acknowledge all of our educators, our teachers, our classified staff, our administrators, our parents, students, and volunteers. I want to acknowledge our first responders who time and time again answer the call, no matter how difficult. I want to acknowledge our partnerships with the governor and the governor's office, and the governor was quick to declare disasters and emergencies that help us to get the resources that we need from the federal government, and of course the resources that come from the state government to support, not the least of which are partners at the Office of Emergency Services. Thank you, Director Ghilarducci, and look forward to your remarks. And Ben Cheetah from the Governor's Office. Our emergency team at the California Department of Education, a fairly new addition just in the last few years, but a needed addition of having team members who can help our school districts access resources, get information, access our new data tracking system, the SIRS system, for reporting. We appreciate you, Joe and Jake, and Juan and Abel and everyone who works, and Leslie on the emergency response team. And a great partner who you'll hear from today, Butte County Superintendent Mary Sakuna. Thank you so much for being here and for your leadership during these difficult times. We appreciate you. You know, the last few years, we spent a lot of time visiting areas impacted by, you know, natural disasters and fires, bringing resources when we can, trying to get resources like water and food and hotel vouchers and gas vouchers and things that families need to respond. We will continue to do that. We're here in any ways that we can be helpful. I want to thank everyone at OES and others who helped us as the rebuilding occurred last year. We built new playgrounds on school campuses, being able to get portables and other ways to support. That's why we're here, and we hope that this webinar today will provide you with information that can help you as you navigate these difficult times. Not the least of which is we know that when these disasters take place, that we have to have access to counselors who can support. Because of our experience working with many of the communities impacted by wildfire, we have learned acutely how difficult it is to get counselors in many of our rural communities and other communities in our state. And just want to report back to you that last year we said we would begin work to recruit 10,000 counselors. I want to report back to you that we've completed that work. We introduced a bill with Senator McGuire, SB 1229, that would provide the resources to recruit 10,000 counselors. And I want to thank the governor and the legislature for partnering with us and moving the contents of that bill into the state budget so that we now have scholarships available to anyone who wants to become a counselor. The scholarship would be for $20,000 for an aspiring clinician. And so we will continue to work on ways to get counselors short-term and long-term to support our communities. And of course, anyone who wants to become a school-based counselor and avail themselves of the scholarship, we ask you to send us a note at mhcounselors@cde.ca.gov. We'll be sure to put that in the chat, but we welcome those who would want to become a counselor and support students and families and educators during these times of trauma. And so as we open the school year, we acknowledge that you're opening under difficult circumstances to the many counties that are impacted. Just know that we are here to support you. You'll hear great information from our emergency services team, as well as from our partners who are here today. And we thank you and applaud you for your incredible work under difficult circumstances and ensuring that in spite of the circumstances, California kids can still get a great quality education. We're here with you and we're here to support you. Enjoy the conversation today. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Guillen.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Thurman, and thank you so much for your practical leadership in helping our school districts and our students across California. Really appreciate it. I'd like to now ask our Deputy Cabinet Secretary, Ben Cheetah from the Governor's Office, if he can give remarks on behalf of the Governor's Office. Ben, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Abel, and thank you for everyone who's here listening. And thank you, Superintendent. As always, you've brought people together around a very important topic, and I'm especially grateful because this is a topic that's critical to be proactive about. School communities have been through a lot in the past few years. I don't need to tell you all watching, you're living it, you're doing it. Some of those things have been new opportunities like the ones the Superintendent highlighted, the things that brought us into this work in the first place. So universal pre-K, universal school nutrition, more supports for mental health and social emotional well-being. These are things that we've dreamt about and that we're excited to implement. Some of those changing dynamics are new challenges. So those include the unknown and unexpected. When I say that, I'm sure that many of you have in mind, case in point, the pandemic and the challenges that we've had as school communities in terms of responding to the changing dynamics of the pandemic. And some of those challenges are well known, or at least well known to us at this point. Things that we see coming down the pike, things that we know are going to happen and that we need to prepare for. We know we're living in a new normal of climate change. We see it, we feel it, we live it. We know our communities will experience wildfires, and we know we need to be on our toes, standing ready to support our impacted communities, especially our children in schools. And many of you, that's your life's work. That's what you are working every day to do. We've got an incredible group of leaders today and experts who can touch on many of the things that can keep us well prepared. These are leaders and experts who've been working tirelessly to do just that, to support our school communities statewide. That includes our next speaker, Dr. Mark Gallarducci. Many of you know him. He's a man who's been working for decades, for a decade plus, to expertly shepherd our state through the impacts of climate change. And every Californian, including me, owe him a great debt of gratitude. And hopefully, as we move forward on this webinar, we'll learn more about how we can all collectively prepare for what's to come. So thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation, and I hope that it's a productive one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. Appreciate always the support of the governor's office on this very important topic. And we know that we had quite a few people join us a little bit after this conversation started. So just wanted to reiterate that this webinar will be posted on CDE's website to share with your colleagues and other people that weren't able to attend. So thank you very much. Once again, Ben, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Director Mark Gallarducci. Mark, are you there? There you are. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us. I know you've got a busy schedule as well. There's quite a few fires going up and down the state. But thank you for being here and giving us an overview of what the state level response looks like for schools and emergencies. So I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Great. Well, thanks, Abel, and Superintendent and Ben. Great to be with you today, and of course all the presenters, great partners of ours. Let me apologize to start off with. I have a little bit of a cold, and so my throat's a little scratchy. And I wanted to take a minute and talk a little about overarching what the Office of Emergency Services does. Excuse me, and then I'll turn it over to two of my subject matter experts, Deputy Director Ryan Burris, who oversees our recovery, and our Chief of Access and Functional Needs, Vance Taylor. Let me just say that the Office of Emergency Services is nested in the governor's office. They have a broad responsibilities, everything from coordinating the state's response, the overall state's response to emergencies and disasters, while also doing emergency planning, disaster recovery and mitigation. We are the Homeland Security Agency for the state of California. And of course, we respond and recover from wildfires. All that's coordinated through regional offices and through our state operations center. And our role is in support of school districts throughout the state, but also CalFire, our partners, or the Highway Patrol, or other state agencies that are responding to these kinds of events. And although wildfires obviously are a persistent threat in our state, disasters come in many forms in California, from natural causes such as earthquakes and floods and severe storms, to human-caused disasters such as active shooters and cyber attacks and chemical spills, all of which can affect schools. But today we're going to talk about wildfire. And as we talk today, we do have wildfires burning in the state, and those wildfires have impacted school districts. And we see this time and time again with climate changing impacts that we're seeing in the state. Hotter hots, drier dries. We're in a multi-year drought that has accelerated the pace of wildfires. and we've seen continual wildfire activity year in and year out, getting worse and more complicated. It's really not if, but when a school will be impacted by a disaster, and knowing how to respond in times of crisis and continually enhancing and evaluating and testing school emergency preparedness efforts is really critical. Knowing your plans, having partnerships with your local governments, with your state agencies, and understanding that there is this machine that turns on, working day in and day out to mitigate the impacts of wildfire throughout the state of California, which you'll learn a little bit about in a few minutes, but also, not only mitigating, but to respond to help a school district who have been impacted, to help students and faculty and parents sort of navigate the impacts of these events. They are tragic. The superintendent was spot on, and our hearts always go out to those who have experienced loss in these events, and we see it time and time again. But it's really important to know that those who are prepared, school districts that have taken the time to learn and exercise, put plans in place, they are more empowered to be able to navigate the impacts of these events. And when we actually have a disaster, we have put together a schools task force in the State Operations Center. And that schools task force is a combination of the California Department of Education and OES and a number of other state agencies and possibly local government and local school districts that can actually work around whatever the incident is or the event to be able to help those school districts deal with the impacts. COVID is a great example of that. The ability to get PPE or test kits or other kinds of support to schools through that very, very complicated event, to wildfires where you may lose a school or school classrooms and require the need to go in and rebuild, clear debris, or possibly just get in some temporary classrooms, to, as the superintendent pointed out, provide critical crisis counseling after an event. So there's a few things that we support beyond the schools task force. The California CalOES Preparedness Ambassadors Program, which is a curriculum designed program for fourth grade students to develop and promote disaster preparedness. And the schools task force works extensively with local schools throughout the state to do that. We also have an emergency management guide for schools on how to prepare effectively. And we encourage schools to know what their hazards are by going to the CalOES website at caloes.ca.gov and going to My Hazards, the My Hazards section, and looking up the hazards around your particular community and your particular school district. All of these things are done in a collaborative fashion, and it's really about working hard on the front end to mitigate and prepare, but being ready to respond and then ultimately recover. So with that, if I could, maybe I could turn it over to Ryan Burris from my Deputy Director for Recovery, and have him give a few points on recovery, because these are important, very important topics for schools that have been impacted by wildfires. Thank you.
Thank you, Director, Superintendent, and Ben, for having us here today. And thank all of you. Schools are the primary source of influence and protection for our kids. You not only educate, you provide the nutrition they need and after school care and health services. And knowing all that, it's important that we do what we can at the state and the recovery side to wrap around you, to make sure that you have the tools you need to have a safe school, retrofit that to whatever the hazard may be. So just want to go over a few programs that we offer. One, we do have the California Disaster Recovery Framework, and under that you have 6 recovery support functions. Education falls under HHS, and we turn those on as needed, particularly for the larger events. And in Butte County and Camp was a primary source. We were able to get the federal, not only FEMA, but also the Department of Education and HHS people from DC to a field visit in 2018. And as you heard from the director, we do have task forces, but this actually led to another task force in 19 through the assistance of Butte County to start, it was first of its kind, a children's and youth task force to assist the county with creating their long-term recovery strategies and also assisting them in meeting their priorities that was set by Butte County. We were also able to reach out to other states to bring support to Butte County. We were able to get the superintendent from the Joplin tornado. His name was CJ Huff. He actually came in and assisted Butte County and us and just rebuilding the school that was lost, very similar to what he lost. So we have a lot of tools that we can bring to the table, and we have a big outreach, not just inside state, but also others to provide assistance. Another thing we do, schools not only they open and then they close and then they open again, but sometimes they can't because they themselves are destroyed. And we can assist with that. We can assist with working with other state agencies like Department of General Services and providing some temporary schools for you so you can start. We did that recently in the Plumas County event. They were forced to have a lot of their kids go to additional schools that was tailored to 7th and 12th grade, and the school that burned down was tailoring K through 6th grade. So they wanted to focus on that same education, that same group set. So we were able to provide a temporary structure fairly quickly, and they're going to open. Well, that was open in April, and it's going to open this school year as well while they rebuild their school. Another important component of recovery is our mitigation program. It's important to know that we are able to assist with mitigation if you have a local hazard mitigation plan for your school. And if not, we can even provide assistance for you to create one. Fire specific, we can help with a lot of those projects. Not only hardening the school, but thinking beyond that. We can help with fuel breaks. We can help with defensible space around the school through the mitigation program. We can also help with evacuation routes and doing vegetation management to ensure that people can safely come in and get out of the school area as well. We also started a new program started by the director. It's called CalFire Prepare. And this gives opportunities for school districts that are in high risk areas and also are high in social vulnerability indexes. Potentially, we can assist with your cost share for your grants moving forward. And this is first in its kind. No other state is doing this. So I'm glad that we were able to do this. Some examples of what we've done before, not so much on the fire side, but LAUSD, we did help with a lot of seismic retrofits, and also in Tahoe and Truckee Unified School District, where we help with some snow load retrofits for their schools. So it is an all hazards approach, including to harden the school as well for fires. Of course, we have public assistance funding, either through the federal government and or the state. The state does have its own public assistance program. And if something is lost for the school, potentially they would be eligible for cost share to rebuild that school quicker and get things open sooner. Closing, we can do a lot. I know I just shared a lot. I am happy, my team is happy to meet with all of you anytime to further discuss this in further detail. It's what we do every single day. It does not take a disaster to get the conversation going. So I encourage everyone to work with us here at OES, and we'll be happy to help you with your local hazard mitigation plans, your mitigation efforts, or anything that you want to discuss with us on the recovery side. So with that, Director, I'll turn it over to Vance from OES, Access Function Needs.
All right, thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Director Gauducci. My name is Vance Taylor, and I serve as the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at CalOES. And one of the primary, most essential elements of emergency management is an unwavering commitment to provide equitable, accessible, quality services to every individual that gets impacted by disasters, including individuals with access and functional needs. Because the sobering reality is that all disasters regardless of type or geography, disproportionately impact individuals who have access or functional needs. And that's particularly true in school settings as well. Understanding this harsh reality, the governor did something unprecedented and created the Office of Access and Functional Needs and placed it within his Office of Emergency Services. Ours is a twofold mission. First, to identify what are the needs that all Californians have before, during, and after a disaster. And then, working with our partners, working to integrate those needs throughout every facet of the state's emergency management system. This issue has and continues to be a high priority in California, particularly so when viewed through the lens of school safety. Children are indeed our most precious resource. I have two daughters. My eldest just started her senior year of high school. The youngest is now a sophomore. And every day for as long as they've been going to school, I always have the same hope, which is that they'll come home safely. Now, you just heard Director Goducci say that educational entities up and down the state should be prepared for all types of disasters. Wildfires, of course, but all disasters. He then outlined some of the tremendous work and available resources that are being utilized to push forward on that front. A central component in the mission of school safety is to ensure that the access and functional needs of every student are identified and then integrated within every school's emergency operation plan. Teachers and administrators at every school in every district across the state have students in their classrooms who are deaf or hard of hearing, who are blind or have low vision. They have students with speech or communication related disabilities, students with autism, students use mobility devices, and students who rely on assistive technologies. In fact, when we consider the total universe of students in California who have a disability, the numbers are vast. And those numbers get even bigger when you include other access and functional needs, such as temporary illness or injuries. Now, to integrate the needs of all those students, schools need to partner closely with pupils, partners, staff, and all individuals with access and functional needs, so that they're planning together with people and not for people, ensuring that students have their needs met before, during, and after disasters. As an agency, the director has led this mission, and we've done a tremendous amount of work in partnership with our partners at the CDE to promote, support, and advance school safety on issues such as evacuation-related considerations, right? So if there's a wildfire, how do students get to safety? How do they get picked up and taken from point A to point B? Callaway has created a guidance in partnership with the Department of Rehabilitation that empowers individuals with disabilities in school settings to develop their own evacuation plans and to work with administration officials to further implement those plans. Look at topics such as lockdown considerations. Are classrooms large enough to allow students and staff to move away from windows and doors? How do students with mobility aids do things like run, hide, or fight? Callaway has developed the nation's first ever integrated active shooter awareness guidance. Are schools and students aware of it and implementing it? That's what we work with our partners on. Earthquake considerations. The state's lock, cover, hold training has become a staple and a best practice. We work on things like communication and warning. Callaway advocates using communication systems that can alert all students and staff regarding emergencies using things like accessible visual aids, sign language, large print, and audible systems. These are just a few examples of the information products and best practices Cal OES has developed. We actually have an exhaustive list of those resources on our Access and Functional Needs library, which is housed on the Cal OES website. So I'd encourage people to go there for more info. At Cal OES, we know that as school administrators, teachers, students with disabilities, and whole community stakeholders partner together with emergency managers, suffering and loss of life among student populations decreases. That's why we're here today. That's why we partnered together, because individually, we're good people trying to do good things. But together, we're more than the sum of our individual parts. We are capable and able to integrate school emergency operation plans in ways that inform and empower, to keep students safe, secure, healthy, and independent, while furthering dignity and education for all youth. Together, we work to build a more resilient, more equitable emergency management system for all. Thank you.
Well said, Vance. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mark, Ryan, and again, Vance, thank you for joining us. And thank you really to the whole Cal OES team. We really appreciate the strong partnership that CDE has, and really with the entire schools team at Cal OES. But specifically, I wanted to give a shout out to Lynn Olson, Nick Murray, Danielle Chapman, and the entire exec team at Cal OES. You guys have been fantastic partners for CDE, and we really appreciate that. So we'd like to continue that partnership and in service to our schools, and really appreciate that going forward. So with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Chief Curtis Brown with CalFire. Chief, I'll turn it over to you. You've got the mic.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the invite for CalFire to be part of this webinar for educational entities. It's great to be able to present for this first time, and hopefully if you're conducting this webinar next year, we'll be invited back. But I think it's important for me to talk about where we've been this last year, where we are now, and then what it looks like for wildfire through the end of this year. So I'll start with, in June of this year, CalFire completed our transitional peak staffing, which means that during peak fire season, we all know that fire season year-round now, but during the peak of fire season towards June, we brought on 356 additional engines, which means that those engines are staffed 24 hours a day for response. And then all of our aircraft was staffed in June as well. And then we also staffed our additional hand crews. And all that was done early because of augmentation funding that was approved by the governor and the legislator last year. So that increased our staffing by 44% for that month, leading into where we are now. Last year, at this time, CalFire had 5,968 fires for 1.4 million acres. Compare that to this year at this time. Right now, CalFire and U.S. Forest Service and local government fire departments have responded to 5,415 fires, which is 553 fewer than last year. So we've had less fires at this time than we did last year. And we've had 198,000 acres, which is 526,000 fewer acres this time than last year. So right now, it's a really good sentiment in the fire service right now because we are experiencing less fires, and then we also experiencing less burn acres, which means it's better air quality for all. So fires of note in Monterey County in January of this year, we had a fire that burned almost 700 acres, and that was the Colorado fire. If you can imagine being on the coast in Monterey, humidity is high, but to burn 700 acres in January was nearly unheard of, which is why we always say that fires are year round now. We had the airport fire in San Bernardino County in February. That fire burned 4,136 acres. We had the coastal fire in Orange County, which burned 200 acres. It destroyed 20 homes, unfortunately. And then we had the electric fire that started on July 4th of this year, which burned 4,478 acres. On that fire was our first IMT deployment. If you're not familiar with IMTs, it's a 72-person team which manages the incident as well as the fire suppression resources. During that fire, we also had our S-70I fly for the first time at night. Since then, it's flown also in the Oak Fire. And so we hope within the next year or so, we'll have all 10 of our air attack bases flying the S-70I Firehawk at night, which will help us suppress fires throughout the state. We've had the Oak Fire in Mariposa County. Most recently, it started January 22nd for 19,000 acres. Right now, today, that fire is 98% contained. We also deployed one of our IMTs on that fire, and it's the second largest fire that we've had this year. Currently in Six Rivers, they have a complex that's made up of almost 6 fires. Collectively, those fires are 21,000 acres. Right now, today, that fire is 19% contained, and that's the largest fire of this year. For the outlook, we expect portions of Northern California and the central and southern Sierras and foothills to have significant fire potential through September, with areas of Southern California retaining a high fire potential into November. In collaboration with CalOES, over the last 2 months with the passing of Senate Bill 209, we have established what's now called the California Wildfire Forecast and Threat Intelligence Integration Center, which is the WFTIC. And I'd invite all of you to visit that website, because there you'll find information in regards to weather information, threat intelligence gathering, and also wildfire forecasting, which what it was designed to do for educational and fire service personnel. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for your service, for all you do for California at CalFire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have the National Weather Service. David Lawrence, where are you?
I am right here, everybody. Hang on one
There you
second.
are.
Sorry. Can you see me? All right. Sorry, having a little video trouble this morning. And I am ready to go. If you could show my slides, that would be wonderful.
Great. Got the slides up for Mr. Lawrence here. Just 1 second, we get the slides up.
Oh, no
there we
problem.
go. All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Lawrence, a meteorologist and emergency response specialist with the National Weather Service. Very proud to say that we work closely with the state of California, one of our most important partners for fire weather forecasting, providing weather information. So great partnership, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I just quickly wanted to talk about some of the kind of where we're at and where we may be headed. I know Curtis just a minute ago mentioned talking about some of the outlooks, and we're going to hash that out a little more graphical detail here and talk a little bit about the weather information in the next couple of minutes. So next slide, please. All right, so let's start with where we're at right now. This has been hashed out a couple of times already over the past 45 minutes or so. We're in a drought. I mean, that's pretty simple across the state. This is a very prolonged drought across much of the state. As of about a week ago, this is the latest on the drought conditions across the state, about 45+% experiencing the top 2 categories of drought. Those are extreme and exceptional. In other words, very bad drought across much of the interior portions of the state, portions of southeastern California as well. And a little over 99.8% of the state is in drought conditions overall. So a very impressive, lots of reds and drought and water shortages across the state due to this ongoing prolonged drought. So next slide, if you will. I always do like to talk a little bit about the positive. We have seen a little bit recently of a drought reduction across southeastern portions of the state due to a very active monsoon weather pattern. This is a temporary reduction, but again, like to look on the positive occasionally. We have seen a little bit of improvement due to some fairly significant localized heavy rainfall over the last 2 to 4 weeks. As we go to the next slide, please. Unfortunately, though, you will see that as we go through the next couple of months, especially as we look into September and October, this is the drought tendency or persistence map for much of the United States. And you can see across California, a good chunk of the state is expected to see drought persist. That's probably not a surprise to most of you. Of course, it's going to take a tremendous amount of water to undo what we've seen build up over many years now. A little bit of hope again across the southeast as over the next 2 to 4 weeks. Additionally, we expect the monsoon to remain pretty active. So we may see some continued drought reduction again for far southeastern portions of the state. But overall, as we head into the fall months, it looks like drought will persist for much of the state of California. Next slide, please. As we take a look at the temperature outlook, this is an average from the Climate Prediction Center, part of the National Weather Service. They take a look at trends as we go further out in time. And what this is showing you is that above normal temperatures are most favored, not 100% guaranteed, but most favored across the entire state as we go through the months of September, October, and November. Do keep in mind, this is an average. Week-to-week trends vary. You can have some cooler periods in there, of course, and some hotter periods. But overall, we do expect temperatures to average out above normal, which is a trend, obviously, we've seen many stretches over the past couple of years with persistently above normal temperatures, both during the summertime and during the wintertime as well. Next slide, please. And then as the flip side of that, we'll take a look at the precipitation forecast. And this is where things get a little bit more murky. Obviously, as we get out of the drier time of year that we're in right now, historically and climatologically speaking, and head toward those winter months into the later fall period, there's a lot of questions about where storm systems end up tracking. That's very uncertain at this time, so we can't give you an exact amount. So the precipitation forecast is the one that is the most tricky. Again, over the next couple of weeks, it does look like southern and southeastern portions of the state remain pretty wet overall with that monsoon. But thereafter, a lot of questions about just how the weather pattern will play out. We are going into a third La Nina year, which is cooler than normal temperatures in the Pacific waters. Historically speaking, for much of the state, that has meant drier than normal conditions, especially across southern and central portions of the state. Again, no two La Ninas are created equal, but historically speaking, that is what the trend has brought. But as we look at the official forecast here on the screen in front of you, we have what are called equal chances, which truly does mean there is no strong signal. It's not just the flip of a coin. There really is no strong signal out there as to how precipitation will play out. Again, wet over the southeast the next couple of weeks, dry in the north overall. But as we get into September, October, a lot more questions about where those storms will track. So finally, I'll wrap it up with the next couple of slides, please. Next slide. We'll take a look at what Mr. Brown there was speaking to recently with the significant wildland fire potential outlook for the month of September. You can see a large portion of Northern California, portions of the Sierra, coastal, central, and Southern California as well, highlighted for above normal significant potential here. Again, this is for the month of September. As we push forward into October, notice that that area in the north does shrink just a little bit. Next slide, please. The area in the north will shrink just a little bit. Again, as we get into that time of year where it's a little more uncertain about exactly where precipitation might set up, October is typically the time of the year we can see storm systems impacting much of northern and sometimes central California. Some of you may remember last year was a very wet October across much of the state. Again, we'll have to see how those trends play out. But right now, the current predictions favor coastal Southern California and also some portion of Northern California for above normal fire potential. And finally, on the next slide, please, as we look into the month of November, this is where things get a bit murky, but historically and climatologically speaking, of course, Southern California, coastal Southern California is where things typically get pretty hot this time of the year with offshore wind events. That is where the area is most favored for above normal fire potential. So next slide, we'll wrap things up with a quick summary. And I just want to encourage you, we have local National Weather Services offices all across the state of California which serve your local communities. So if you've never connected with them, I highly encourage you to go to weather.gov, click on the area of the state that you're in. That will take you to your local office and you can connect with folks in that office. for preparedness materials and all sorts of other weather-related information, getting weather alerts, all that sort of thing. So just want to encourage you to do that. But as we wrap things up here, again, 99.8 might as well be 100% of the state of California continues to experience some level of drought, with just shy of 50% seeing the top 2 categories. So pretty bad out there. A slight improvement from where we were this time last year, but not by very much at all. And drought is likely to persist again for much of the state as we head through the fall months, giving us that above normal fire potential for much of Northern California through at least September, probably early October, and then that trend shifting south to the more climatologically favored areas of Southern California, October into November. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I'll turn things back over.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I live in the East Bay, and typically we don't use much air conditioning. It certainly has been a lot hotter, and we're very fortunate to have Jessica Morse here from the Natural Resources Agency to talk to us about climate change. So, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us here today on somewhat short notice, but appreciate you being here. And I think it's a nice tie-in to talk about the weather and then climate change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abel, and really happy to join all of you and really excited to speak to schools and educators today. So I'm Deputy Secretary at California's Natural Resources Agency, and my portfolio is our wildfire resilience activities. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're seeing climate change impacting wildfire resilience, and then sort of how we actually achieve wildfire resilience. So I don't want everyone to just kind of feel overwhelmed about what we're facing. I'll talk through a little bit about the state's actions of what we're taking to actually achieve those resilience levels, and then talk about some specific things that schools can do and are doing to actually help us be more fire resilient as a state. So California's fire crisis is really unusual because fire is actually a natural part of California's ecology. For millennia, Native American tribes in California actively managed our forests with natural fire that burned at low severity. So you got like 6-inch, 10-inch flame lengths that would come through frequently and essentially have a cleaning function. And a lot of our ecology is adapted to that need for fire. What we saw is that sort of policy changes in the early 1900s across the nation led to this culture of fire suppression. So that meant we removed natural fire. Right before that, our fire resilience forests in California had been clear cut by the gold rush, mostly the Comstock lode. We lost 96% of our trees in California. They grew back overly dense, so we got these really tight packed forests, like the ones you might see along Highway 80 or 50 over the last number of decades, and which is not the natural stance of our forest. And then you add a removed natural fire regime, which was supposed to come through every 20 years. You now have areas that hadn't burned in 100 years. So now you have tight packed forests. So the structure of our forests and our ecology in California was no longer resilient. You had trees competing for water because they were way too packed in for what their natural ecological role should be. So enter climate change. So you already have this stressed forest and these like stressed ecological conditions on the land. Then you add a mega drought starting in 2012 that created drought conditions which weakened trees and made them susceptible to disease. And for example, the beetle kill pandemic throughout the Sierra, we lost 169 million trees between 2012 and 2015 in the first wave of this big drought to that drought-stressed beetle kill condition. You then had those dead standing trees. They started falling over. So by the time 2020 rolled around, we had a bunch of really wide diameter fuel on the ground. So our fuel dynamics that we have in California, they estimate our models use 3-inch diameter wood on the ground for a fuel-driven fire. Well, suddenly when we're looking at the Sierra and our upper watersheds, we're looking at 30-inch diameter wood because so many trees died and were left on the forest. You just couldn't get that much out. And so then you have hot, extreme heat conditions that then dry out that dead fuel. And that's where you get the conditions that we started seeing in 2020 with the creek fires are really good examples. So you had that sort of policy that that led to dead standing trees that fell on the ground, hot conditions right before the 2020 in the creek fire in 2020. We had we recorded 130-degree heat in Death Valley, right? One of the hottest temperatures on the planet. So you have all of this dead fuel, it's dry as a bone, and then a fire started, and the heat signature on that fire was so extreme that fire created its own weather system. And we're seeing this over and over. It's called a pyrocumulus cloud, and you can see it's a pillar. And the Creek Fire and now the McKinney Fire are two extreme examples of that, where they both created pyrocumulus that went 50,000 feet in the air. And so that burned so hot at such high severity that it really decimated, in the Creek Fire's example, the watershed. And we saw also fire behavior that's incredibly extreme with the Dixie Fire and the Caldor Fire last summer, also all targeting the upper watershed. And so that means that the watersheds are breaking down their functionality, so that what we're seeing is that now that when it rains, the water runs straight off rather than percolating down into the mountains and having the Sierra be our water storage supply. So you're seeing that natural infrastructure start to break down and damage our water supply capacity. So what we're seeing is this strange cycle where the structure of the forest is then vulnerable to extreme conditions of climate change, which then create further extreme conditions with wildfire, which then exacerbate our natural infrastructure, exacerbating drought conditions, which then exacerbate fire conditions. So it feels like we're in this climate-driven riptide of wildfire, and the conditions that we had on the ground plus climate change are just acting as an exponential exacerbator of the conditions that we're seeing. So the question is, what can we do about it? And what's really exciting is that we actually have tools to be able to tackle this crisis head on. And the fire crisis is one that is solvable. It just means that we have to do by hand what fire was supposed to have done over the last several hundred years. And that makes our forests and wildlands more resilient to catastrophic fire and to these extreme weather conditions, making them more resilient to climate change. So there's really three fronts that we work on fire resilience, and you actually need all three. They all support a resilient state. You can't just do one and ignore the rest. So across those landscapes, we're thinning out forests, restoring natural fire regimes like prescribed fire and cultural burning back to the ecological norms, whether you're talking about grasslands, rolling oak woodlands, coastal redwoods, forests. There's a fire regime for every condition in California. So we're working by hand to get to a state where we can reintroduce natural fire across those landscapes. The next layer is around communities. Think of these like concentric circles. So you've got the landscape, you're working then around communities. That's where we put in strategic fuel breaks around communities that allow us and firefighters to have a tactical advantage during a firefight. So these are kind of thin strips of forest lands or areas where vegetation load is reduced so that the fire behavior changes when it hits that fuel break, making it approachable for firefighters. We saw these networks of fuel breaks that we had put into place before the Caldor fire, for example. That is why Myers, Christmas Valley, all those towns in the Tahoe Basin are standing. Pines is standing today because we had networks of fuel breaks in place. Firefighters on the ground saw the flames go from 150 feet to 15 feet when they hit the shaded fuel break, and they were able then to approach that fire and hold it off and steer it around the communities. The last area is investment inside of communities. So these are interventions that make towns and communities and homes less prone to ignition during a wildfire. So those are tactics that you heard from Cal OES, like home hardening, defensible space. This is where you are actually, we found that homes in a wildfire burn from the inside out. It's embers getting into attics. It's flammable material like shrubs right under windows that'll burst the window, then the flames get in. So really changing the fire and the embers sealing off your home so that embers can't get in, modifying any fuel around your home so that it doesn't burn hot right against that home, retains the home's structural integrity, makes it less likely to burn. The same goes for schools. Making sure your schools are hardened is going to really give those facilities a really good chance of survival during a wildfire. And so across those three areas, what we see is that we've modified fire behavior so that it doesn't become catastrophic. So if you're lessening the intensity on that landscape by restoring normal, natural, ecological fires, as opposed to these catastrophic flames that are going up 200, 500 feet, giving ourselves that tactical advantage during a fire, creating those safe evacuation corridors, using fuel breaks, and then hardening facilities so that homes and our infrastructure is less likely to ignite during a fire when those embers are coming in, then makes fire less destructive. So the state has invested, last year we invested $1.5 billion. This year in front of the legislature, we requested $1.2 billion. Those negotiations are happening right now. And so for wildfire resilience alone, that's in addition to all of the suppression tools that we're talking about. So we have put all hands on deck. We are getting these fuel breaks on the ground, restoring those natural ecologies, and a new program to specifically harden homes. We also have a lot of educational resources through the Fire Safe Councils, and also the UC Fire Advisors Program would be really great to come in and talk to your schools. And so we're investing across all of these tools to get these projects on the ground. We also changed our state business practices to move fast. That's the key part here, is that wildfires are not waiting for our processes. And so we have moved incredibly fast. It typically took a year or maybe two from getting dollars to getting projects actually on the ground. We shortened that to about 6 weeks by changing our contracting processes, our environmental review programs, and our grant guidelines, timelines, so that last year when we got that funding, we had fire breaks in place that were ready for both last fire season and this fire season. So for example, the Electra fire that broke out over 4th of July weekend in Amador County, there was a fuel break that we had put in there earlier over the winter from this funding that was able to arrest that fire on the first day. And there was also a fuel break in the city of Santee in San Diego that we had put in place with the funding from last year. A fire broke out on Thanksgiving Day on a red flag day. It was really intense, bearing down on a neighborhood, hit the fuel break. Firefighters were able to use that. We've got community hardening, defensible space programs. So these programs are really making a big impact on the ground, and our speed and our capacity to stay fast is essential. So let me wrap up by talking about what schools can do, because the climate conditions, as you heard, are getting more intense. Our interventions are getting better, but the question is, are our interventions going to be able to keep pace with climate change? And so what we're doing right now is schools can play a critical role across 3 fronts here for us. One, just protecting your facilities and making sure that they're safe spaces is really critical. So working with your local CalFire unit, they have home hardening tools to make sure that your facility is hardened against embers getting in, and that you are up to code for defensible space standards, which now includes a new 0 to 5 foot non-flammable zone. So nothing that can ignite within 5 feet of any building facility. That includes like wooden fences or decks. And so really working with your CalFire unit on getting up to speed on those standards is going to be important. Also, obviously, as you've heard about education and preparedness, your students are going to be our best advocates to make sure that homes and families are prepared for wildfire. It's also really important that families understand and that students understand the role of fire, because we want to get to a spot where when students understand the difference between a natural prescribed fire and understand that that's playing its ecological role and keeping us safe versus the catastrophic fire, so that we don't get public pushback and fear around prescribed fire, and education in schools can really help around that front as well. The last area is that schools can actually also play an active role in wildfire mitigation. There's little things that we are needing a lot of help in using the woody material coming out of the forest. So whether you're constructing a new facility and using mass timber, for example, instead of steel or concrete, using bioenergy as a local boiler. There's some schools doing that in California, powering themselves based on wood pellets from the forest. We're also seeing, there's a great example, Colfax High School, for example, is using wood from fuel reduction projects and post-fire cleanup in their wood shop program, and then having the students they have a little local mill that the students run, and then they mill that wood and then turn it into just beautiful cutting boards and products in their wood shop program. So there's lots of small ways that schools can engage locally as well to partner with our fuel reduction activities. And also we really want to recruit your students to come join the California Conservation Corps and CalFire fuels crews when they are in high school. We want to be able to get them coming out in the woods, knowing about those programs, so we can recruit them out of school and actually put them to work in helping us tackle the fire crisis head on. So the climate conditions are intense and extreme, but there's lots of tools we can actually do that help us reduce the risk to communities, and we want your partnership in doing that. So thanks for having me today, and look forward to working with you.
Deputy Secretary Morse, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your practical tools and suggestions for LEAs and school district partners. So thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. And so now, as we transition from our state and federal partners, we know that there's nothing like the lived experiences of our local education partners. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And with that, we have the pleasure of having our county superintendent from Butte County, Mary Sakuma, join us here today. She certainly has the lived experience of dealing with a lot of emergencies, and certainly she has a lot of wisdom and lived experience to share with you all. And so with that, we'd like to welcome Mary Sakuma from Butte County, and she has a PowerPoint presentation she'd like to share with us. So Mary, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time, and we know you're super busy as well. So I'd like to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Abel, and thank you so much for having me with you today. Before I begin, I do want to thank Superintendent Thurmond and Abel, Joe, and Jake at CDE, as well as Leslie Taylor, who was so incredibly supportive to us during various disasters that we've experienced. I want to thank the governor's office, Ben, and others who also have reached out and supported us throughout these past few years. And of course, our friends at CalOES, you have been so incredibly supportive. So I want to thank Director Ghilarducci and give a special shout out to Tom Graham and Lynn Olson. Again, two people who were critically important to us during various disasters that we've experienced. And of course, to all the other partners who are on this webinar today, thank you so very much. I am Mary Sakuma, Butte County Superintendent of Schools, and it is truly an honor to be here with all of you today. Next slide. So I'd like to begin with a question. And the question is your organization really prepared for a major wildfire disaster? Next slide. So as many of you know, we experienced in November of 2018, the devastating Camp Fire. And many of you saw lots of images from that fire. But what you may not be aware of is that in September of 2020, we once again experienced a devastating wildfire here in Butte County that destroyed another school, Berry Creek Elementary School in Berry Creek, California. And these are some images from that devastating fire, known as the Bear Fire, or also the North Complex Fire. Next slide. So how do you prepare as LEA, whether you're a charter school, a traditional district school? What are you doing to create the best possible response that you can have in the sad possibility of this kind of devastating fire? So first up, create a disaster response plan. And there are many templates out there available to you, but it's critically important that in this plan, you define the roles and responsibilities for your school site, for your district, and in collaboration with your county office of education. One of the reasons it's so very important to define roles and responsibilities of individuals is that you need to be able to stay in your lane. I'll give you an example. If your incident commander is pulled from their work to work on donations management, for example, that is not the best use of your team's time. During a major disaster, there are many, many duties and roles and responsibilities. And so it's very, very critical that you quickly identify who will fill each of those roles. Best plan is to identify those roles in advance and to make sure that there's somebody to back up that person as well. So, for example, when we assembled our mental health supports team, we had one person who took the lead, and then we identified one or two other people who could continue leading that work. What we found was, in the midst of a disaster that carries on for days or weeks, you really are needing to be more than just one person deep for each of those roles. So for a small district, you're going to have to reach out for help. We encourage you to have supply kits prepared for specific tasks. And I'll go into this more a little bit later, but having those prepared and ready at identified sites is also critically important. And then prior to experiencing a disaster, hopefully your district or your LEA has done a thorough inventory of all your assets. This will be important for insurance claims, as well as for working with FEMA to determine what your unmet needs are. Next slide. Okay, so under identifying the roles and defining the roles and responsibility, it would be important for your LEA to establish your own emergency operations center team. This can mirror the model that is used at the county and state level. And in fact, ideally, it should mirror that, because again, when we're all speaking the same kind of language, using common terms, that is really very helpful for all of the different agencies with whom you'll be interacting. Again, defining the role of each member of your team and reaching out to your county office of education when you know that you simply will not have enough staff to cover all the necessary areas. And then once you have the roles identified, really getting clear on what the responsibilities will be for each role. Next slide, please. And this is just an image from a city level emergency operations center when we were responding to and in the first phases of recovery for the CalFire. We established something very similar at one of our buildings here in Butte County. Important to note, it's always a good idea, if possible, for the County Office of Education to have a sort of primary location where you can establish your EOC, and also a secondary one. As it turns out, in 3 major disasters, the Oroville Dam disaster, the CalFire, and the Bear Fire, in all 3 of those instances, we were not able to use our primary location for our EOC, and instead stood up our own center in a different location. Next slide, please. All right, so here are some of the disaster-related outcomes for which you should be preparing. be prepared for an incredible need for mental health supports. You'll have the need to create an immediate response and establish a mental health supports team. So I have to tell you how very grateful I am to Sonoma County Office of Education and other COEs who reached out to us very early on during the CalFire to help guide us in establishing various teams. And they very generously sent people to us to assist us. And ultimately, we ended up doing a call out to mental health providers around the state of California to see if they could come and be of support to our students and our staff and our family communities. And in the case of major disasters, it's important to note that there will also be a need for long-term planning around these mental health supports. One of my colleagues reminded me the disaster recovery phase comes in many additional phases, and they're circular. So you may see a spike in need, and then it may ebb for a while, and then you'll see that need come again. And I just have to tell you that we are still providing mental health supports out to our various LEAs nearly 4 years post-CalFire. The need is that great, and it's very real. Next slide, please. All right, some other disaster-related outcomes that you should expect is in the area of business operations. How are you planning for a loss of or limited communication channels? So during the CalFire, for example, there was a loss of cell phone reception in many, many areas throughout the county. And so be prepared. What are the sort of analog communication channels that you might be able to fall back on? There's the potential that you would have loss, or at least temporary loss, of access to student and business data. And if you tragically lose school buildings, where is school going to be held? Get creative here. Some of you may be familiar with some of the creative ways that Paradise Unified, for example, reestablished school sites post-CalFire, whether they were partnering with elementary schools or actually, believe it or not, setting up school in an old hardware store. So it can be done with the help of CDE and the governor's office and our other partners, such as CalOES. You really might have to get creative, and so be prepared to do that. What are you going to do if you can't print checks or issue payments? Now, for most of you, that usually happens through a county office function. And so that is one of the first things that we make sure as your county office of education, to establish alternative locations for printing hard copy checks and for ensuring that our payroll systems are robust and have backup systems so that as people are experiencing disaster, they're not also experiencing a loss of income. What are you going to do if you can't create your POs to access the resources that you may need? And finally, what are you going to do if you lost everything? Who are your points of contact? How will you reach them? Are there other districts around your county or other counties on whom you might be able to rely? Establish those in advance so that during a disaster, when things are chaotic, you can be the calm voice in the room. Next slide, please. All right, so how do you develop a plan? We are very fortunate to have some very fine examples now that have been created by various school entities, as well as CalOES, CDE, and CalFire, as had been mentioned before. This particular example that I'm showing you here is from the Technology Steering Committee from the County Superintendent's Group, CSESA. And this disaster recovery guide actually was in development prior to the CalFire, and our very own IT director, Steve Monahan, was one of the chief authors of this document. Why this is important is that when the CalFire hit, Steve knew exactly what he and his team would need to do to provide supports to the various districts that were impacted. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of the pages from this plan. And of course, here he's talking about battery backup systems, generators. How are you going to keep the network and server equipment cooled when you're without power? And of course, what is your backup? What are your backup power sources to ensure that all of these critical networks can stay up and running? So this can be customized with the small districts in mind. This is very important. Over 600 of the districts in California are considered small, with 2,500 students or less. And so, of course, you have perhaps not as many resources, but it will help you determine what you'll need to do and where to ask for help. You don't have to be a tech person to understand many of these concepts, and this will help you, again, look for that outside help that you need. Next slide, please. All right, and so last year we finished our work at Butte County Office of Education on an emergency communications guidebook. And in that guidebook are messaging templates, ways for addressing the media to ensure that you have a clear and consistent message, and tips and recommendations regarding emergency communications. And big shout out to Jacqueline Dillard in our office, our communications officer. By the way, BCOE made a decision post CalFire to hire a communications officer after we saw how critically important having that kind of support was. We were very fortunate during the CalFire to be able to have some of the most top-notch communications experts really in the nation who came to support us and help guide us with our communications. And so now is the time to be thinking about that. If you're a small district or small county office and you don't have the resources to have your own communications officer, then have in your mind a way to reach out to CalSprout, which is the California School Public Relations Association, and ask them for their assistance. They were tremendously helpful to us. So anyway, if you would like a copy of this communications guidebook and any of the other guides that I'm talking about today, please do feel free to reach out to me. When I get to the last slide, it will show my contact information. Next slide, please. Okay, stay in your lane. This is extremely important, and I know I said it earlier, but it bears repeating. I'll give you an example of something that happened during the CalFire. So many of the districts in our county took in students temporarily onto their campuses. And so it was critically important that school personnel on those campuses with visiting students from various districts, that they stay in their lane and do the work in which they are expert, rather than trying to do other kinds of work. So all kinds of good-meaning or well-meaning people were making donations. And it was things like used clothing. So one day my predecessor walked into a school office and saw the registrar of students ironing clothes. And he said, whoa, time out. We need to stay in our lane. We are education experts. We are not experts in handling these kinds of donations. Please, let's partner with agencies who do have expertise in that area. Lynn Olson very aptly describes this as the disaster after the disaster if you don't have the ability to stay in your lane and to resist the urge to try to have your hands in too many different relief or support efforts. Remember, the bigger the disaster, the more agencies are going to be involved with response and recovery, including FEMA, CalOES, the insurance carriers, and so many other agencies who come to the aid of those in need. We serve our students and families best when we stay in our lane and do the things which we are trained to do, and that we can say that we truly have an expertise in. And when we don't, that's when we reach out for help. Define how your particular role in education fits in with the larger scope of recovery, and understand when, for example, when is it time for the County Office of Education to step in and help you? And when is it time for the LEA to say, thank you, County Office, we've got this aspect of it. Making sure that you're working across LEAs in a really cooperative and a teamwork sort of mindset is extremely important. Next slide, please. All right, there are some very specific things that you as an LEA have an opportunity to do during an emergency. Obviously, if it's a large wildfire that's impacting your whole county, that declaration will be made at the county level, and then, of course, at the state and potentially the federal level. However, very important for a district school board or a charter school board to make sure that your board takes specific action to declare an emergency in your district. And one of the reasons this is going to become really important is when it comes time to make repairs of school buildings or to rebuild schools. So I won't go into depth on this because this is not my area of expertise, but important to note why, if you're a Cupcake district, that you get a 4/5 vote if you have a 5-member board, which most of you do, and making sure that you are following the public contract code listed here to ensure that you can avoid having to do all of the procurement requirements that you would normally be required to do. Now, that being said, it's extremely important that if you are receiving state or federal aid, that when it comes to spending those dollars on resources that you need, including the rebuilding of facilities, that you do follow state and federal procurement guidelines and rules. Next slide, please. All right, I said that I would talk a little bit about supply kits, and this is just a stock photo that I wanted to share with you, but I just want to point out some of the things that are included in here. So depending on whose supply kit this is, different tools will be in the supply kit, of course, but some common things that you would want to have would be your mask. We're, of course, all familiar with a variety of types of PPE, but make sure that people who are required to respond to disasters in schools, that they have been pre-trained on how to use any kind of specialized PPE that they might need. Notice that there's a real emphasis here on lighting, because if you have no power, you have no light. And when you go in to retrieve equipment, you're going to need some light sources, so battery-operated lanterns, and notice headlamps as well. And then, of course, whatever tools of the trade that you might need, whether you're with the IT team or with the maintenance and operations team, each of you would have the designated supplies for your craft. Next slide, please. All right, some of the lessons learned. I'm going to start actually with some advice from our IT department here. Again, lights aren't working when the power is out, and fiber does melt in fires. So up in Paradise, for example, there was no cell service, there were no hotspots, there was no connectivity whatsoever in the first few days following the CalFire. And so what will you do? Making sure you have your supply kit ready to go so that when you are given access to the facilities and you know what is able to be retrieved, that you are prepared. Remember, you're going to be encountering air quality issues, so be sure and have your PPE. And just a word of advice, even though you may be the principal of the school or the superintendent of the district or the executive director of the charter school, remember that during a disaster, you're no longer in charge of what's happening in that community, and you may need law enforcement escort to retrieve the equipment on your behalf, or to allow you access to go and retrieve the equipment. This is really important, and unfortunately, I've experienced this multiple times. And it's very important to make these requests through your county Office of Emergency Services. They can make that request to your sheriff department or to the local police department to provide the access up into the community when it is safe to do so. And they are usually very, very helpful in determining when is the soonest time that it's safe for you to travel, as long, again, as you are escorted by law enforcement or other emergency response vehicles. Next slide, please. All right, this is something that I really want to emphasize. Do reach out to other districts or other county offices of education that have been through major disasters. Here at BCOE, we get phone calls nearly every week from different educational entities around the country asking for help when a disaster strikes. And what I mean when I say, year round is we have responded to support teams when it's a fire disaster, of course, but also all different other kinds of emergency situations. And so please reach out to us or Sonoma County Office of Education. And of course, now we are so blessed to have Jake and Joe at CDE, who are dedicated specialists with lots of expertise who can help you. They want to be there for you, and they are there to truly help you get through the process. Again, I want to emphasize, discuss where your EOC location is going to be. Do that now before an emergency, and remember, have a backup location. As I mentioned, we were unable to be in the city of Oroville during 3 major disasters, and so we had to pivot and set up an EOC location in Chico. Especially want to thank Cal OES for sending Tom Graham over to us in those first couple of chaotic days. He really helped us to get a rhythm established in our EOC and to bring some systematic ideas to bear so that we could not only deal with our own losses from our county office, but also the losses of our various districts and our charter schools. Our EOC ended up also being sort of a hub where different school districts and charter leaders could come for taking care of matters as simple as making a photocopy of something that they needed documentation. So, as a county office of education, we are honored and humbled to be able to provide that for our districts and charter schools. And so please develop that relationship with your county office of education. Remember, when it comes to decision making, that can be done significantly faster when all of the leaders and the stakeholders are in the same room. So when you have your team leads for your EOC, you can make those decisions and determine what the actions are to be for a given day, and to be able to come back at the end of the day to report how things went, and also to communicate our unmet needs up the chain of command. That was one of the most important things that we learned during the CalFire. Just a little word of advice: solar is not very effective in a dense smoke-filled air. So if you are totally off the grid and rely on solar power in your district, remember that you're going to have some backup plans. And then doing regular wellness check-ins with staff. So you can do that through the EOC mechanism, asking your own team members how they're doing, checking in, and then asking them to do the same with their various teams out there. This is very important because we are, when we're in this situation, we may be victims helping victims. And shout out to Tom DeLapp, communications expert, for sort of crafting that idea and embedding that with us, that when you're in that situation, we have to take care of ourselves and one another. Very, very important. One of the things I said to one of my team, at one of my team meetings is I said, please remember, as this disaster recovery drags on, that every day you need to do something normal. It seems strange, but I felt guilty going to the grocery store because I thought, oh, I could be spending more time at the EOC following up on some things. No, when things start to begin to settle out and slow down a little bit, take care of yourself, do one normal thing every day, and make sure that you're checking in with your colleagues. Next slide, please. All right, some of the communications lessons learned. Make sure that you have hotspots, MiFi type devices on hand and already deployed out to your key leadership. Also make sure you have handheld radios accessible for use. As school entities, you have the opportunity to obtain what's called a GETS card, a Government Emergency Telecommunication Service card. And again, if you'd like some more information, please reach out to us at BCOE. Our IT expert can help you get that set up. Do run your drills annually. You know, in the CalFire, as chaotic as it was and as all-encompassing as it was in our tiny districts and tiny schools and our larger schools like Paradise, there was no loss of life of students or staff. And we attribute that to them having emergency preparedness drills in collaboration with your local fire prevention councils. Do run those drills and take them seriously. Build your network with other agencies. Do that ahead of time. And also in regard to communications, understand that there will be a lot of information that gets distributed that could be wrong in the middle of the disaster. And so make sure that you yourselves are not responsible for incorrect information or misinformation. And make sure that you fact check anything that you hear before you repeat it. And one of the things that I'd like to share is that in communications, it's important that you control your own narrative as much as possible. You know, in a very large disaster, you will have not just the local news, but the national press and potentially even the international press trying to tell the story. It's really important that you as the district leader or the county office leaders are telling the story, getting the facts right, and talking about how we're going to get our schools up and running again. Next slide, please. All right, so here is an example from El Dorado County during the Caldor fire, how they set up mobile Wi-Fi units, and they really you know, sprung into action when the need existed. And notice that one of the Wi-Fi hotspots is set up right inside a van that's used for the early childhood education program. So great job there, El Dorado County. Next slide, please. All right, some helpful resources. Once again, contact your county office of education if you are a school district or a charter school Find out ways that you can collaborate in the event of some kind of a disaster, and certainly in a wildfire disaster. Make sure that you assign a team member who can serve as a liaison to the County Emergency Operations Center. And remember that they have different functions as well. And one of those is the communications group, and please make sure that you embed somebody there. Make sure that there is two-way communication happening so that you can collaborate, and make sure that you are using the pre-established chain of command to get your unmet needs communicated up the chain of command. Contact CDE. Joe and Jake are there for you. They are true specialists, and they can help you respond and recover through these emergencies. Make friends with our partners at CalOES and other state agencies, and be sure and contact CalSPRA. Again, that's the California School Public Relations Association, for communications assistance. Next slide, please. Here are some of the resources that BCOE has available to you. We will be constantly updating these resources. If you are interested in any of these and other resources that we'll be developing, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Next slide, please. And finally, if you have any questions, while we're unable to do a Q&A for this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me personally. And if I cannot answer your question, I will direct your question to somebody on our team or right back over to CDE to lend their expertise. I again want to say thank you to the California Department of Education and Superintendent Thurman, CalOES, the Governor's Office, and all of you here today for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Superintendent Sakuma, so many pearls of wisdom. I hadn't thought about the impacts of solar on smoke-filled days. Wow. Thank you so much. There's nothing like lived experience, and thank you for sharing your experiences with all of us up and down the state. And all our partners here today. Very much appreciated, and thank you for making yourself a resource to everyone on the call here today. As a reminder, we are going to have this webinar posted on the CDE website as well. So with that, is Joe, where are you, Joe? Are you on the line?
I am here. I think Mary did a great job kind of introducing Jake and I. So we will take it over from here, if that's okay, Belle.
Great.
All right. In fact, I'm going to turn it over to Jake first after an introduction. So my name is Joe Anderson. I'm the emergency team manager here at CDE, and Jake is the specialist, and he's the person who's probably going to reach out to you first. I mean, we both like to reach out to you and we back each other up, but we are a two-man team in a large state with lots of schools. But we are very passionate about what we do, and we try to make sure that your needs are taken care of if you do have any disaster needs. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Jake to talk about kind of what our collaboration looks like with LEAs. Jake.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. And I want to show some honor to you. Mary Sakuma did just a wonderful job explaining what the impact looks like on the local level and also at the operational area level during a disaster, and how they prepare, how they coordinate with their local education agencies. Just a fantastic job all the way around. And also, I would like to say thank you to our state agency partners. Being new in this field of emergency management, education is rapidly expanding, rapidly producing, rapidly always evolving more and more each time that a disaster happens, with our capability and our understanding of what emergency management looks like within our discipline. Emergency management is a multidisciplinary field in which education is one of those sectors of emergency management. And I have yet to find someone to argue with me over the statement that education is the emerging field in emergency management. Almost daily, I'm seeing new emergency management positions pop up. Whether Indeed, LinkedIn, you're seeing positions pop up for local education agencies hiring emergency management personnel. And it's important that we understand what this looks like. How do we do this? How do we do this emergency management thing that is in front of us? Coordination is a key component of that. As you're doing your preparedness activities, like this wildfire webinar has done such a wonderful job of pointing out all the different components of it. It's really a foundational principle that you connect with those emergency management folks at your level. There's a thing in the state of California called a standardized emergency management system. It's something that was created quite a long time ago here in the state of California from an incident that happened, the Oakland Hills fire, which was many years ago. And during that incident, what happened is that people from all around the state and some from outside of the state came to one centralized location. And there was communication and radio traffic going on back and forth, and people trying to advance in fire suppression activities. And they pull up to hydrants and their hoses didn't fit the hydrant. Or they were asking for things on the over the radio, and they would say things like, I need a tanker. Well, that could mean a lot of things. It could mean an air tanker, a water tanker. It could mean a lot of things. And so coming up with a system that supports the flow of information and resources up and down the level of government was a key component of what came out of what's called Fire Scope. And so now we have a way in the incident command system and the standardized emergency management system to ensure that we have common nomenclature. That means that if I say that we need to put in a resource request, that you would know what that means. Unfortunately, one thing that we notice in all these emerging fields of emergency management, whether it is a utilities or whether it's schools or whether it's social services, is that we are all trying to keep consistent, clear communication while disasters are happening. So here at the California Department of Education, we're really trying to focus on helping the local education agencies and the county offices of education to be able to have common nomenclature, to be able to have a disaster management structure that supports our ability to respond with one another. Our job as a state education agency and really as a state entity in emergency management is not to tell you what to do. It's not to tell you which way to go. It's to empower you with the information and the resources to be able to respond to the disaster that happens always at the local level. And so in our collaboration, we're going to continually reach out to you. We're going to continually try to check in with you because we want to ensure that if there's any gaps there, that we can fill them. We don't expect you to know all of the answers. We don't expect you to know exactly what to do next. In a disaster, it's always different. And disasters are continually getting more complex and getting more widespread and more consistent throughout the state. And so when that's happening, understanding that we can lean on our partners both on the local level with local education agencies and working at the county level with emergency management and the county office of education, and then up at the state level, us working with CalOES and the wonderful team that they have over there, both in response and preparedness and even in recovery and mitigation, helping to really ensure that we have wraparound services and supporting in all of the phases of emergency management. And so that being said, I'd like to pass it over to Joe so he can talk about what a tool that we've developed in order to help support that collaboration up and down the levels of government. Joe?
Thank you, Jake. So yes, the school emergency reporting system is something that we designed because we definitely found this gap in communication between state level and the local level as far as education went. So while there has always been communication between these two levels, with emergencies, they tend to we tend to need that information quickly, and so do the LEAs need the services and support as quickly as possible too. So often it wasn't unusual before the system was out that we would find out about a school being damaged or destroyed by a fire, or just impacted by a fire, after the fact, like a day later or something, through the news, or someone called us and told us. And unfortunately, there's some valuable time that was lost during that period of time. So our solution was to create this system that could give us this kind of real-time data, this communication between the local level and also the state level, where the LEAs can report directly and simply. We made a very simple system where they can just report, hey, our school is impacted, and you can say our school is damaged, our staff are impacted, our students are impacted. And what that means is that in these fires, sometimes schools themselves are not directly impacted, but they are indirectly by, it could be the smoke that comes in. As Mary mentioned, if if it's a cloud or a smoky day, the solar is not going to work. You're going to have trouble with power at the school location. Also, if there are parts of the town which are on fire, where the students or staff live, they may be evacuated, or the school area may be evacuated. There's all sorts of impacts that happen due to these large disasters, which may not affect the school directly, but it does impact the school and the population. And in these small communities, typically where these large fires tend to happen, these schools are the center of their communities. And it's very important to make sure that they're protected, number one, and two, that they can recover as quickly as possible. So by using this school emergency reporting system, Jake and I are notified, as is Juan. Basically anyone who has access to SIRS, they'll be able to see that somebody has reported something. It's like, hey, this school district has reported that this particular school or multiple schools have been impacted, and this is how they've been impacted. And that's a trigger for us where we're like, okay, well, let's get into action. Let's go reach out to them. Let's provide support like right away. And what we do, we connect them with CalOES, with their local emergency management, and with any other resources they need right away. And often we find that many schools, for many schools, it could be a new superintendent or somebody who, has never dealt with a disaster before for their school. So they really have no idea what the first step is to do, which is understandable. But we have that wealth of knowledge that we can provide to LEAs and to charters and, school districts throughout the state. So that's kind of the whole point of this system. I do have up on the screen the website. It's www.cde.ca.gov/IS/LS/EP/. So with that website, that will take you to where SIRS is found. And there's also a SIRS training on there, and there's some slides from an earlier webinar about how to use it, how to report. So if you have any questions, you can always email us. And on the next slide, I'll share with you our contact email address for the emergency services team. But I do encourage everyone to use SIRS. You're all signed up already. If you're an LEA, you're already signed up for the system. You just need your access code. If you don't know what that is, feel free to reach out to me or Jake. We do have those access codes for you, and we'll provide those, and we'll get you started on that. And we are planning in the near future to do a drill or an exercise on SIRS statewide, just to see if we can get all of the LEAs to report. So that way you can see what it's like. And with that, that's everything I'll say about SIRS right now. Let me change the slides here. All right, and as promised, here is our contact information, the emergency services inbox. So you can contact us here. Jake and I both have access to this, so we can respond to you there if you have any questions about either this webinar or about SIRS specifically. We're happy to help you there. And also here is our website for CDE. We will have this webinar posted for everyone to see and to share for those who weren't able to make it today. And one last thing, I just do want to thank everybody for attending this webinar today. I know 2 hours is a big commitment, so I do appreciate everyone coming on board. Especially really appreciate the presenters for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here and share with us those things that we need to know about emergency management in schools. Because really, emergency management in schools are kind of two different worlds. Jake and I are trying to bridge that gap. CDE is trying to bridge that gap. And we want to make sure that you can get there by learning from others' experience and others' expertise instead of learning the hard way, which is going through the disaster by yourself. So we don't ever want that to be the case for you. We want to be able to be there to help you out. And with that, we will go ahead and end the webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us again at emergencyservices@cde.ca.gov. So thank you everybody for your time.